welcome to all our listeners in what is Series 1, Episode 1 of Asha Look, It's Irish History. I'm Niall Salmon and I'm joined today by my two esteemed colleagues and friends, Mr. Kieran Dowdall and Mr. Stephen Fraser.
Hello.
Afternoon, gents. Kieran, how are you on this fine Sunday afternoon?
Oh, never better. Excited to share Irish history with all our listeners.
Excellent, good stuff. Theo, how are you keeping, bud?
Good. It's the first time I've been called esteemed. Thank you.
Excellent, lads, excellent. Well, a pleasure to have the both of you down here in Ballymore Studios for the first time. The focus of the narrative for this podcast, or this series of podcasts for the listeners out there, it's going to be focused on all aspects of Irish history. Mm-hmm. And it could be anything to do with Irish history. It could be life during the Great Famine. It could be Brian Boru. It could be the Viking raids, the Norman invasion, the 1798 rebellion, or even as far back as Neolithic times.
Yeah.
Currently, we'll look to explore all of the above in later series, but considering where we are now, approaching the end of 2022 and exactly 100 years since the foundation of the Irish Free State, the focus of this series is going to be centred on Ireland and Irish life over the last 100 years since the end of British rule. And we're going to be basing every episode from each decade from the 1920s right up to present day. Considering this is Series 1, Episode 1, the focus of our discussion today is going to be on Irish life in the 1920s. So how we got on as a country when we finally got the opportunity to govern ourselves. When the British finally left, it only took them 700 years. They didn't get the hint, so us Irish needed to get medieval on their asses, to quote a certain Pulp Fiction. Just to know for our listeners, be prepared for random quotes from the three of us. We do share a love of film as well as a love of Irish history, so... Lads, I think it's fair to say, I mean, the three of us have always shared a graph for Irish history. I think putting a podcast together is something we've always wanted to do. We're in our mid-30s now, so no better time to do it. What do you reckon?
No, that's it. But there's so much stuff that we can cover in our own particular brand of humour and history.
Absolutely.
So what got us into Irish history, at least I think anyway, is like the movie Michael Collins. Who does not love that movie? And so if you're familiar with that movie, you're going to be hearing plenty of quotes from that.
Absolutely. And coincidentally, Steve, that was only filmed over in Hollywood, which is only 10 minutes over the road from our present location.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
absolutely.
like the scene where he gives his first... They can shoot us.
No, that's in Longford, but the scene, remember when he actually gets assassinated? It's depicted as
Bella
Blah. Yeah. Hollywood only over the road. Yeah, the pub as well, yeah.
Jeez, we should get down there for a pint one day.
I think we'll go afterwards.
How far away is it?
10-minute drive, but
Let's go.
We'll have to walk, we can't bring the cars.
Like I think apart from having our own history book in for the Leaving Cert and Michael Collins, my dad was always into it. I was always telling Kieran on the way home. My dad did a movie called The Informer, and he always had loads of books like what you have there. So
100%.
I'll have a different...
100%. Your dad was in Michael Collins, actually, very briefly.
He was, for De Valera's speeches. Yeah. He was the only one not to wear a hat. He kind of broke... Like, they're all told to wear hats, and he was just there without a hat, just looking normal, just listening.
Yeah, I remember you pointing him out in the crowd. Yeah, it's very good.
You can see him, but, like, you have to have a keen eye to see him.
Yeah, for sure. So, look, I suppose eye behind this series is to chat about Irish life, as I mentioned, since the foundation of the Irish Free State in 1922. Onto the formation of the Irish Republic in 1929, right up to present-day Irish society. If we can, we'll try to document every aspect of Irish life, including political and social change, weird and wonderful moments over the last century, along with sports, notable people from the last 100 years, and Ireland's place on the international stage. And I think we're going to be covering it from the perspective today of the three S's: social life, sport and life, and scandal.
Irish people love a good scandal.
That they do, Kieran. That they do, sir. They do.
Is my section the scandal bit?
It is indeed, sir. It is indeed.
Very good.
We'll let you surprise the listeners now when it gets to your piece, Theo. But I think, Kieran, just to kind of kick things off, you've been doing some research on all things related to Irish social life in the 1920s.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to start with is the British leaving, because that is the official start of the Free State. So the withdrawal had been going on right the way through late 22, but the last garrison left on the 17th of December. And that is, as far as we're concerned, that is when the Irish Free State officially was established and took over.
1922, was it?
Yeah,
December
17th. So the British troops left the military barracks around the country. The Irish Free State Army marched in to formally take possession. Now, there was one small difference here. The 3 treaty ports, Bearhaven, Spike Island and Lough Swilly, these were retained by the British in accordance with the Anglo-Irish Treaty of the 6th of December 1921. Now, these wouldn't be returned till 1938, and we will do a whole episode as we talk about the emergency in Ireland. We'll go to that. But as well, on the 17th of December, this is when the border with the north of Ireland was officially established. So now we're going to look at the troop number. So, as I said, the withdrawal hadn't happened, but on the 17th of December, there was 364 officers, 6,254 other ranks still left in Ireland. The overall commander of the troops was General Neville Macready, and he'd been in charge during the War of Independence. So, the last barracks to be handed over was the Royal Barracks, which is now Collins Barracks, which is now the National Museum of Ireland. General Richard Mulcahy for the Irish Free State saluted the regimental colours of the Wiltshire Regiment as they left, and he formally took control. So when leaving the barracks, the battalions were formed into columns, and they marched out in formation. The columns were led by a band playing Irish songs. Now, probably remembered by a lot of witnesses' newspaper reports was the song Let Erin Remember the Days of Old. So the British troops marched from Collins Barracks along the North Quays to the North Wall to await the transport. So the British troops were flanked by the Free State Army to protect them from attack by the anti-treaty IRA, and the Dublin Metropolitan Police, the DMP, they'd cordoned off the area, cleared any obstruction. They were in charge of crowd patrol.
Jesus, so were the IRA trying to, like, even though they were leaving, could they not just let them go?
So this was what happened, but they were afraid that they were going to try and attack them to...
Just a spike, kind of?
No, to make the IRA form back into one cohesive unit.
Oh, right.
But this never happened. They had the entire lot of them, both sides of the quays, right from Houston Station right down to the docks, completely cordoned off. There was some well-wishers, but for the most part, there wasn't. But this is one of the things. So they didn't receive the hostile departure that a lot of people thought. So around O'Connell Bridge, there'd been a large group on the bridge waving them off. And you have to remember as well, like, a lot of people around the barracks were apprehensive about the British leaving. Their incomes depended on the money and trade they had. So in front of, as we talked about now, Collins Barracks, that street, Benburb Street, was a huge market street. And in later times it became a haven for prostitution. And I know it sounds funny, but a lot of these women, they depended on the money from the soldiers to feed their families. And it's the strange thing in Irish history, for some people who live in inner cities, you don't have to go back too far to find somebody in your family who may have had to do that to survive.
And this is related to Monto.
And that's the Monto. We're gonna look at that, because again, this was an economy built around these soldiers here. And so the kids living around the barracks, they were able to make small amounts of money buying cigarettes, delivering messages, other items, to the barracks. But because these were fortified during the War of Independence, there was wire meshes around the windows, and the kids had to push the cigarettes through one at a time. Now,
so was the new Free State Army going to be? Would that not just replace all the trade, or was it going to be get smaller?
So they didn't really know. For what look, with any bit of change, they were under the impression of going, well, I've been making really good money off the British soldiers. Will the Irish soldiers, will they be as generous? Will anything what changes are going to happen? But this is the thing. So the people who lived around the barracks, they got on with the soldiers. So Kevin Kearns, the author, interviewed Margaret Burnham. She was interviewed at the age of 81, who lived in the Sarsfield Quay area, it's Wolftown Quay, in front of the Royal Barracks. And she remembers the Wiltshire Regiment coming into the tenements to say goodbye the night before the evacuation, and it ended up with a party, piano, singing, dancing, and as a good Irish pastime, a prodigious amount of drink.
I wonder, like, a lot of the when the British left, like you just mentioned there, that they changed a key to Wolftown Quay. Do you know what I noticed? Like, if you ever drive through Foxrock, it's still all of the, like, I think, like, one of the main roads, like Parliament Road. I wonder why they never changed that area to, like, I don't know, St. Patrick's Road or something.
Well, with some of them they did, but they more wanted to change ones where it was a particularly
notable area.
Yeah, but like sometimes you have British streets. You know, you have Gloucestershire Street became Sean McDermott Street, and there was a lot of these where they changed. But again, this didn't happen now till the late 20s, early 30s. It wasn't like we did it the same.
We had a few years under our belt as a government and an independent country, you could say. Yeah,
exactly. Like O'Connell Street became O'Connell Street in I think it's been 1924. You know, this had been promoted since like the 1890s to change it to recognise Daniel O'Connell. But so here's one of the other things that like a lot of people make a mistake of. So the British soldiers, these weren't as disliked as the Black and Tans, the auxiliary, or the police of the Dublin Metropolitan Police, the Royal Irish Constabulary. Now, so according to Martin Walton, so the founder of Walton's Music Store, I'm sure most people know that, he had this quote. He says, "The ordinary British Tommy was a decent fella. We had very little grudge against him. We didn't want to hurt him at all. It was the intelligence officers, the Black and Tans, the deliberately organised ruffians we were up against." So, like, he was one of, he took the anti-treaty side. He was very a strong Republican, and even he saw that it was between the soldiers and the Black and Tans. And obviously then you had some soldiers who met girls over here, and they'd return and marry them. A lot of these men, they joined the new Free State Army. And the thing is, though, it was a bit of a change because during the War of Independence, girls were warned not to be seen with soldiers under the threat of having their head shaved or worse. So there was, and also you have to remember, this is after the First World War, so there's a legion of ex-servicemen, mostly made up of Irishmen who fought in World War One, and they actually paraded with the British soldiers from Beresford Place, which is where Liberty Hall stands today, to bid farewell to the troops. When General Macready passed, they presented him with an engraved gold medal in appreciation for his services. They would then march behind the main column down to the North Wall, and on some of the vehicles then you had the British writing messages such as "Goodbye Dublin," you know, and there was a bit of joviality in the leaving, you know.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Like, I mean, think of like that was an explosive change in Irish life at the time. Like, I was googling there the DMP, like the Dublin Metropolitan Police. When did that actually become An Garda Síochána? And I was actually in 1925. When they merged with Garda Síochána.
And so there was the Civic Guard, there was the Irish Republican Police, and they kind of all amalgamated together, you know. But so with the British military equipment, so here's something else. Like, a lot of it went to the Free State, but most of the stuff they didn't have the room to transport it out, so they began to sell the stuff off really cheap. So there's an ad in 1922, and they're selling a Ford van for £40, a Crossley tender. So this is the truck the truck carrier, yeah. One you'd really recognise, but one of these was selling for £75, which was quite a deal. But so, when the British troops, they got to the North Wall, General Macready boarded his flagship, the HMS Dragon. He hoisted his flag, his troops gave 3 cheers, and the ship fired a 17-gun salute. The last 2 troops to board the ships were Acting Captain Lieutenant Henry Robinson and a Captain Shepherd. So, on board the ship, Macready made his final entry in his Irish War Diary, and this simply stated, the evacuation of Dublin was completed without any interference from the Republicans. At 3 p.m, the British ships departed. England had officially left the 26 counties. The Free State came into existence, but as the country was in the grip of the Civil War at the moment, there wasn't time to celebrate. But if you look at the papers from the next day, so the Evening Herald on the 18th of December had a quote. So it says, "Today, a load of cold and empty cookers standing in line at the Alexandra Basin, some huts, small flags trampled into the mud, and some flotsam and jetsam are the sole reminders of the British troops."
Well, good night and God bless, lads. Don't get the door hitches on the way out.
But so, from what I've read, it was an anticlimax in some ways, because Dublin was still in the grips of a civil war, and the enemy had just changed uniform to a lot of people. But so what we may look at now, because we're not going to cover the Civil War, that is going to be its own episode, but we're going to look at the consequences of the Civil War. So the end pretty much came in the 10th of April 1923. Liam Lynch, the leader of the Republican anti-treaty side. Most people think it was De Valera. It wasn't. He was just an ordinary soldier. So he was killed in a skirmish in the Knockmeal Down Mountains in County Tipperary. The Free State Army, now at this time known as the National Army, had extracted information from some of the Republican prisoners in Dublin that the IRA executive was in the area. So as well as killing Lynch, they captured a couple of the senior anti-treaty IRA officers, Dan Breen, the very famous Dan Breen, Todd Andrews, who went on to become a Fianna Fáil politician, Sean Gaynor, Frank Barrett. So Frank Aiken, who took over as IRA Chief of Staff, his ascension, he took over from Liam Lynch, his ascension to leadership was followed on the 30th of April by the declaration of suspension of military activities. On the 24th of May 1923, he issued a ceasefire order to the IRA volunteers. They were to dump their arms rather than surrender them or continue the fight. They knew they were incapable of winning, and this was the end of our civil war. So now the casualty list is very hard to find a true estimate, but the estimates kind of go from about 2,000 to 4,000, and that is and that's military civilian. But at the time, it cost money to register a death. Money a lot of people didn't have, so a lot of these deaths weren't registered, and it's one of these things that we academics have tried and have never been able to agree on one figure. So that's why I've put 2 to 4,000. But now you have to remember, so Dublin and most of the major cities were still in ruin from 1916, the War of Independence, the Civil War. So you can imagine the GPO, O'Connell Street in Dublin, the forecourts, the Customs House, and many other parts of the city were completely destroyed. And because the Free State had to build this, it was going to cost quite a lot of money. So you're talking the material damage from just the property. It's estimated about £50 million in 1922, or about 2.4 billion worth of damage in 2022 values.
Sorry, would it be right in saying that I heard Column say that the Irish Civil War was the civilist civil war?
No, not really. I mean, there was a huge amount of executions, reprisals, people strapping each other to landmines.
Yeah, that was an incident in Kerry, I think it was.
Yeah, a couple of incidents like that.
Well, in terms of like most civil wars that happened, like the Spanish Civil War, it got into the millions, didn't it?
Yeah, but again, these went on for longer. They had international battalions coming over, which kind of, for the Spanish Civil War, that escalated things.
Yeah, it was almost like a precursor to World War II.
Exactly. The Germans and that, they tried to...
They actually had Franco had a lot of Italian aircraft from Mussolini to come and bomb the positions of the Spanish rebels. But don't want to go too much off tangent here either.
No, of course. But so you can imagine then this money, so 2.4 billion worth of damage. Now the cost alone for the Free State to wage the war was about £17 million, or in today's value, 883 million. So what happened then was the Free State unfortunately ended the 1923 budget with a deficit of 4 million. So you're talking around 196 million. So this weakened financial situation had some consequences. It meant that the state couldn't pay its share of imperial debt under the treaty. So what this was Ireland had agreed during the treaty negotiations to pay a share of the war debt incurred during World War I. Now, unfortunately, this adversely affected the boundary negotiations in 1924-25, and the Free State ended up acquiescing that the border with the North should remain unchanged in exchange for forgiveness of the imperial debt. Unfortunately, and that is why the Border Commission ended up not being really of any use in the history of Ireland. But so, in the lead up to this, everyone was filled with hope that the fortunes of the ordinary people would change. This unfortunately would be dispelled. So, just to look at the food, say, at the time, the lead up to independence, diets were very poor. Most people subsisted on bread and butter and black tea, and maybe once a week they'd get some kind of offcuts of meat, some almost rotten vegetables, and they'd make a stew. During the previous decades, food poverty had been blamed on the British indifference, but after independence, it proved harder to blame them. Rather than ushering in a utopia of food and plenty, the post-Ireland independence Ireland saw little improvement. From its inception, the Free State dealt with that legacy of poverty and poor diets, but then on top of that, the problems caused by a decline in global economy. So the poor diet made the ordinary people unable to fight off sicknesses. So you have such poor nutrition that cholera, typhus sweep through buildings and it'd kill off so many people. Even in 1924, the birth rate was the lowest in the world. So there was all the Commonwealth countries and some others were surveyed, and it found that Ceylon was the highest in the world. They had 40.8 births per thousand, where the Irish Free State had a birth rate of just 18.6 per thousand, so the lowest in the world. Wow. And so the problem then you have is there's a hidden history in Ireland. Everyone knows the 1845 to 49-51 famine, but believe it or not, starting in 1925, there was another famine.
1925?
Yeah, so it was, I'll show you, I have a couple of examples. So in January 1925, there was an elderly woman found in her home, lying in the corner of a filthy, verminous room. She was more or less naked, with only a dirty rag really covering her modest parts of her body. Her husband and 2 daughters, aged 36 and 40, were found in similarly deplorable conditions, weak and hungry. But these had once been wealthy. They'd owned 50 acres of land, but their cattle died, and unfortunately they couldn't get relief being landowners. And this comes up again. So in 1927 we have Daniel O'Sullivan from Castletown Bear. Now, before independence, him and his family lived quite prosperously. The British fleet was stationed at the local harbour, providing him a ready market for his farm produce, eggs, stuff like that. However, the family then fell on hard times as Sullivan owned land. They were denied relief, and Mrs. Sullivan was found dead in her home from hunger-related causes. A few days later, their children, Timothy and Rita, died too. And thrown into grief and suffering, Daniel Sullivan reportedly became demented and passed away himself very shortly afterwards. The whole family gone in one fell swoop, you know.
People died in 1925.
Again, very hard to kind of pull a figure on it. Again, the thing of registering deaths cost money, and these people couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford food, never mind the price of it.
Is it just in Dublin, or?
All over the country. Dublin really actually didn't suffer as bad. Most of it, the same as the famine. Big cities did okay. It was the smaller rural populations. Once you owned land, that was that. You couldn't get any sort of relief. But here's the other thing then, the housing people were living in. So these were crumbling tenement houses. So it's typically an 18th, 19th century townhouse adapted, often crudely really, to house multiple families. So yeah, most people living in 5 people to 9 people to a room. Some of these tenements have 150 people all sharing one outdoor toilet. There was a census done in 1926, and it found that a third of Dublin people lived in a room with, on average, 4 people. So obviously it could be a lot more. So these townhouses, these were single family houses with specific areas for masters, mistresses, servants, children, all of that. But now they were filled with families, and as I said, often one family to a room and nothing but a piece of curtain to really separate them. And these tenements were in a bad shape. Oftentimes they collapsed due to vibrations of passing heavy trucks. So we obviously have the 2 more famous ones: 1913, the Church Street disaster; 1963, Bolton Street and Fenian Street disasters. And there was a survey done in 1913 that found that 9,440 houses were considered absolutely unsafe. But these tenements were ignored in the early years of the Free State. So these went on to the 70s. Some of you listening today, your families will have lived there, and you will know stories of them, and you will know that the conditions did not improve. But the Free State did embark on the first building projects, and during the Civil War, this was nothing but remarkable. These took place in Fairbrothers Fields. So it's the Tenter Fields of the South Inner City, so near enough to Cork Street. These were tenant purchase houses for the better off tradesmen and clerical workers. But unfortunately, even it was a modest deposit of £10. That was too much for most people, and that amount had to be halved just to get rid of the houses. But that didn't deter the government. They built new areas, Cabra, Marino, Drumcondra, throughout the 20s, but little in the way was done to add any infrastructure such as bus routes, shops. Meaning people were forced to walk to the city daily to purchase any essentials. You know, this was a time before fridges. You had to do this every day. And the Free State, what they did was they privatised housing. So unfortunately, most builders were unwilling to build houses for the poor. They're not going to build a house for somebody who can't afford to pay.
No money in it.
No, and so that was one of the things. And it was only in the 30s, in which we will look at in more detail, the slum clearances began. There was the Housing Act of 1931, and that allowed the Dublin Corporation, to compulsory purchase and clear slum housing. And this began the modern suburbs that we have today.
Ballyfermot, shout out.
All of that, and they began to just outside. I'm sure everyone's heard the stories in the 20s, 30s, 40s. People considered Crumlin the countryside.
Yeah.
Even up to the 1950s, like Cherry Orchard was County Dublin.
Yeah. They called it the Wild West. They literally, people would go, oh, they live in the country, where in reality now it's just...
Yeah, it's mad. Sorry.
So let's have a look at state building then. So obviously the Irish Free State government, they formed the Cumann Gael Party, which is a forerunner to the modern day Fine Gael Party. So these were a conservative party. They sought to bridge the gap between all Irish society sections, but they also wanted to maintain the old order of things. Kevin O'Higgins, who was Minister for Justice, he once joked that We were the most conservatively minded revolutionaries ever to put through a successful revolution, and that much is true. But the problem that the government faced was, as I said, the fallout of the Civil War, the financial aspect of it. They had to change their tax policies. Now, unfortunately, their tax policies favoured the better off. They cut income tax 27% to 15%, but they instead levied taxes on goods and services like food. These indirect taxes mostly affected the poor. There was an austerity budget. The Minister for Finance, Ernest Blythe, at the time, he brought in the Old Age Pension Act in 1924. This cut the old age pension by 10% at a time of awful economic uncertainty, and this action was remembered very bitterly for much of the up to the 1950s to 1960s, as these people remember. So at the end of the Civil War, there was a mutiny in the army. So about March 1924, the army had ballooned to about 55,000 soldiers. But the Civil War was over, and a lot of these guys were just around barracks, and it was costing a huge amount of money. So they decided, the Free State Army, to demobilise a lot of this army. So they're going to reduce the army right down to a kind of 10,000, roughly what we have today. But so about 50 Free State officers, they were about to be demobilised. They seized the weapons. They abandoned their post. They were actually led by a member of Michael Collins' squad, Liam Tobin and Charles Dalton, the brother of Emmett Dalton. These were two of the Crow Street squad, and they were not exactly adverse to doing stuff extrajudicially. They delivered an ultimatum to the government demanding that the Army Council, headed by Richard Mulcahy, resign and their associates be given some prominent commands. So here's a great one. So they demanded that the army be purged of British officers. As I said, some British officers, they joined the army, and they wanted progress made towards Michael Collins' idea of an all-Ireland Republic. Some contacts were made with interned IRA treaty prisoners to see if there was a common cause there against the Free State government, but they were generally rejected by the anti-treaty IRA. So the mutineers, some of them have been ousted from top commands in the army in 1922 by Mulcahy. Some of them for good reason. Some of their behaviour was brutal. It was erratic. Tobin and Dalton, as heads of intelligence, they often refused to share intelligence with the army command. But here's one of the things. So British officers, contrary to the mutineers' claims, they were certainly recruited for their organisational expertise and skills. They were rarely appointed to high-ranking positions. So Tobin's crowd, as the National Army knew them, in response to their ouster, formed their own faction within the Free State military, the Irish Republican Army Organisation, or the IRAO. They had the backing of Joe McGrath, again another member of Michael Collins' squad. He was then the Minister for Labour, but he was also the head of the Free State's clandestine armed forces, the secret police, the Criminal Investigation Department. These were based in Oriel House, which is now part of Trinity College, and he was also part of the Citizens Defence Force and the Protective Corps. So two factions kind of sprang up. So there was Mulcahy's IRB faction and Tobin's IRAO faction, and this came to a head in March 1924 when the army head of intelligence, a guy called Michael Costello, having listened to Tobin and Dalton's phone calls, concluded they were planning a military coup, including the assassination of several government ministers. Costello wasn't standing for this. He ordered the arrest of the mutineers at Devlin's public house in Dublin's Parnell Street. Shots were exchanged. Some of the mutineers were arrested, others went on the run. There was a strong case for this action. Mulcahy gave his blessing, and it saved the Free State from further bloodshed, even a second round of the Civil War. Yet the funny thing is, when the government got wind of what happened, they pardoned the mutineers, and they actually demanded the resignation of Mulcahy and the Army Council, which is quite strange. So,
wow, hell of a lot went on in the opening few years, didn't it?
Yeah, so you can see if they hadn't done that, we could have had a much more bitter Civil War, where the two sides were split, the army split down on two sides of the army, and that would have been disastrous coming on as we did from our Civil War. Yeah. So something just to go into. So did life get better for people? So let's look at women. So women played a crucial role in the fight for independence in 1916, the War of Independence. The suffragette movement across both Ireland and the United Kingdom was successful. Some women were granted the right to vote in 1919. All women over the age of 21 were granted the right to vote in 1922. However, after Ireland granted independence, cultural expectations led to women needing to take a step back from public life and predominantly becoming homemakers. So the strong presence and power of the Catholic Church kind of really was influential in maintaining this sort of thinking. Like the Irish Constitution, obviously heavily influenced by the Catholic Church, led to many restrictions placed on women. Most notably 41.2.1 of the Constitution that outlines a woman's right in the home. So the particular
Constitution 1937.
Exactly, yeah. So in particular, the state recognises that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state support without which the common good cannot be achieved. So things changed even then. So further restrictions were placed on women. Various bills were passed and the Dáil, and they further restricted the women's rights to employment, bodily autonomy, personal rights. There was an act exempting them from jury duty if a woman chose to opt out. Obviously, on the sale of the importation or the ban on the sale of importation of contraceptives. Then the marriage bar in 1935 made if you got married and you're a woman, you had to leave your job. And as we can see ourselves there now, like, you know, the ideal of equal rights for all in the 1916 Rising Proclamation didn't come true.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest industries for women was unfortunately prostitution, and this was due to circumstances mainly. Women were caught up in prostitution as a way to make a living, feed their family, and one of the most notorious areas was the Monto, the very famous Monto from the
Take her up to
Monto. But yes, it's what everyone knows, and it's kind of a byword for prostitution. But you have to remember,
Where was Monto?
Inner City Dublin, was it?
inner city, so just close enough to O'Connell Street, not too far, maybe a couple of minutes walk. But it was huge. It was the biggest red light district in Europe, you know. So many of the prostitutes were unwed mothers, like they'd been disowned by their families or by their baby's father. Although middle class Dubliners viewed these women as they called whores. The impoverished but devoutly Catholic residents in the Monto and the tenements referred to the local prostitutes as unfortunate girls. Yeah. It's quite a nice way of saying it.
Very nice way of saying it.
But they often turned to prostitution as a last resort. It wasn't for the fun of it, you know. And by all accounts, like the prostitutes were typically young, attractive, and they were known to be well, some of the madams were.
Yeah.
But we actually have a quote from Mary Corbally. Now, she grew up in a tenement on Corporation Street in the 20s, so that's part of the Monto. So she says, I don't feel any shame in coming from the Monto, but the reputation was there because of the girls. We never heard the word horse. We never heard prostitute. Very rarely you'd hear of a brothel. It was called the kip, and the madams were called the kip keepers. But the girls were
Kip keepers.
Kip keepers, yeah. But that's what the Irish kind of phrase, a kip, what's a kip?
Yeah.
Comes from, you know. But he says the girls were very good. They were generous. They were fond of the kids. If you went on a message from them, they give you like sixpence, you know. Or if they'd see a kid running around with bare feet, they'd bring them into a shop and buy them runners. The girls were very generous. Some of these came from the Magdalen Laundries, which there was the one on Sean McDermott Street, very close to the Monto. So the guy called Billy Dunleavy again grew up in a similar time to Mary Corbally. He said it was a hard life for them girls. They were really all country girls that got into trouble, and that's where they finished up. A girl unwed with a baby, she was in trouble from farmer sons. There was a convent around there, and they were put up for 12 months with the nuns. They had a hard time scrubbing floors and everything else with the nuns standing over them. Oh, the country girls got a hell of a time they did. That's what all the girls was on the town. That's where they finished up. Now, the madams had them dressed up in good new clothes, and there was an attraction there. But so some of these madams ended up becoming legendary figures in Dublin folklore. So, you know, a lot of them were tough, shrewd businesswomen in a time when there wasn't many. They ruled the roost in a strict maternal manner. They clothed their girls, they housed them, they took a high percentage of their earnings. And many of these kip houses, as they were called, sold a legal drink, which was pretty good for a partner man from his money, which I'm sure many were. But these women were quite wealthy. They wore expensive jewels, owned cars when it wasn't an own thing. They sent their kids off to prestigious schools abroad. But some were quite possessive of the prostitutes, and they kept them basically housebound. But unfortunately, all things come to pass. And in 1923 and 1925, a guy called Frank Duff, he founded the Legion of Mary with Father Oris Devan. They launched a campaign to close down these kip houses and clean up the Monto. So Duff started his campaign pretty grassroots by walking up and down the front of the brothels, reciting the rosary and pulling anybody walking in or out. Now, this didn't help, so what he did, he enlisted the help of the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and he received the cooperation of the Commissioner of the DMP, General W.R.E. Murphy, and the campaign ended with about 120 arrests and the announced closure of the brothels. So this was on March 12th, 1925. However, the kip houses continued to exist in the Monto long after 1925. This enabled both corrupt politicians, members of the guards, to use the services up and well into the 20s. Some of these became very famous businesses. The Cozy Kitchen on North King Street, Cafe Continental on Bolton Street. These were legendary places run by a woman called Dolly Fawcett, and these remained open well into the 50s, and politicians and guards were frequent members. So we're going to have a last look at censorship now. So we're a Catholic country. A lot of moral pressure on the government to ban things they were considered obscene or liable to corrupt the public morals. So Kevin O'Higgins actually told the Dáil that the existing obscenity laws were sufficient. The government had no right to really further interfere with people's personal freedoms, but he received heavy criticism for that. And there's mounting public pressure. So on the 12th of February 1926, he had to appoint a departmental committee, the Committee on Evil Literature. That's why I just love that Committee on Evil Literature. I wonder what they'd make it today. It's the internet, But so this was basically just to anything that the government didn't want, whether it be political dissent, anything of a sexual nature. This could easily be prohibited. The resale, circulation of printed matter could be banned. So the committee, this was made up of 3 laymen, 2 clergy, so 1 Roman Catholic, 1 Church of Ireland. They met at 24 Kildare Street between February and December 1926, and they heard all submissions from a variety of sources, including the Garda, secular and religious organisations, members of the public, on things they found to be obscene. And it was reported to O'Higgins on the 28th of December. So the findings were that the existing laws were inadequate to deal with the obscene material, and the state had a duty to enforce controls on the production and distribution of this obscene and morally corrupting literature. And it recommended the establishment of the Censorship Board, which exists today. So the opinions of the committee and those who submitted evidence to it should be banned. They kind of varied. So publications that the Roman Catholic Church considered to be obscene were the News of the World, the People, the Sunday Chronicle, the Daily Mail, Vogue, Women's Weekly, Woman's World, the Illustrated Police News, and any girls' picture papers, as they were called. These would be fashion magazines. They objected to the more populist newspapers like the News of the World because they detailed reporting of murder and violent crimes that people believed were depraved. Any birth control literature, anything like that was considered obscene, banned. Other examples would be photographs of dancers to like advertisements where it would show a woman with cream, So then you have the first kind of 13 books that were banned. So you have a couple of them. Counterpoint by Aldous Huxley, The Well Loneliest by Radcliffe Hall, Margaret Sanger's books on sex and marriage. But in 1930 and onwards, many books of doubted literary merit were banned, as well as serious books on reproductive issues and sexual health. So some of them, the authors banned Liam O'Flaherty, The Informer, Sean O'Fuelon, Francis Stewart, Ulvan St. John Gogarty, Frank O'Connor. These were all banned. But finally, it wasn't all bad. So there were some good things on a cultural basis. Sean O'Casey's play Shadow of a Gunman, the first of his Dublin trilogy, opens in the Abbey Theatre on the 11th of April 23. You have W.B. Yeats in 1923 winning the Nobel Prize in Literature, the first Irishman to win a Nobel Prize.
And why were these acceptable?
So with the Shadow of a Gunman, it was looking at the War of Independence, and there was still a...
So it wasn't...
it was. So people were unhappy, and there was protests at it.
It wasn't... From what you're telling me is that it seems as though it sounds very heavily God and, well, Catholic Church influence.
Exactly.
They wanted to put their stamp on it, but these WB8 was probably reporting on something factual. They probably...
Well, WBH would be about poetry. With Sean O'Casey saying 1926, the Play on the Stars opened at the Abbey. Now, this caused a riot, and it's it was after the Playboy, the Western World riots. It's the second biggest theatre riots in Dublin. It was marred by ugly scenes. One man got up on the stage, he punched one of the actresses in the face. W.B. Yeats himself told the crowd, "You've disgraced yourselves again. Is this how we welcome the genius entering the stage?" But again, things change. So we have the Intoxicating Liquor Act coming in 1927.
What did that do?
It
banned alcohol.
Yeah, it banned pubs opening on Christmas Day and Good Friday. So it was, there was recently repealed for Good Friday closed, and that's when that came in 1927.
And obviously the pubs are still closed on Christmas Day, and here we are on the 20th of November 2022, and we still can't get a pint.
No. But so then the final thing, so one of the pivotal moments for Irish history was the first east-west transatlantic flight. Left by O'Donnell, 12th of April 1927. Commandant James Fitzmaurice was on board the plane to Bremen, arrived in New York on the 30th of April. So this was
I think it was actually because I visited Baldonnel before. I visited the museum and I spoke to one of the Air Corps guys about this flight, and it was actually I think it was Labrador, Canada, where the flight actually landed. And I'm not sure how pretty the landing was now, but they did actually make it. Like as you say, the first east-west transatlantic flight was done from Baldonnel, and the guy, the Air Corps guy I was speaking to about, said the British went ballistic over it. Like, they wanted the glory. But like the Irish Air Corps at the time, achieved that
1927
amazing feat. Yeah, like
8 years after the Wright brothers.
I'm not sure. I think
Wright
the
brothers 1919.
Early 1900s. The first flight. Yeah, but yeah, no. Where you're getting New York from, I believe they made their way down to New York, and there was a ticker tape parade for them in New York. But the flight itself landed in Labrador in Canada. But like,
1903, the Wright brothers first
I think there
flight.
might have been because the plane was called the Bremen. I think there might have been a German officer on board helping them with. I don't know whether it was navigation or piloting or what, but yeah, the lads that actually conducted the flight were wearing the Irish military uniform. They had the Fianna Fáil badge, the whole 9 yards. So what a moment that was for the Irish Air Corps, the Irish military, etc.
That's it. So as we've seen now, it wasn't all doom and gloom. We've had many a great sporting moment in that time, and Niall, I think you have a couple of bits on that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Look, I'm conscious of time, and I don't want to eat up too much more time because I know Steve wants to cover a little bit on Scandal. So I just wanted to take 5 or 10 minutes just to talk a little bit about Ireland on the international stage in terms of the world of sport. So look, this was our opportunity now for Ireland to take its place amongst the nations of the world. Now, the GAA very much kind of kept to the script, and there wasn't really any changes. Obviously, the GAA is a domestic sport, a sport we're all very proud of. It obviously had all of that kind of Catholic nationalist influence, and the status quo kept the same way. But what about Ireland's place on the international stage? Now, I'm a big soccer man, so obviously I have I'd love to kind of focus a little bit on soccer. I also want to talk a little bit about Ireland's performance in the 1924 Paris Olympics. But in soccer specifically, so if we think of sports as a whole, sports such as the likes of rugby, hockey, cricket, they all kept within one organisation, and they didn't have a split. Whereas the soccer teams both split, and anybody who's seen the program, the Irish Soccer Split, will be familiar with the story in terms of what happened. And just to kind of cover that briefly, so on the 7th of March 1921, there was a meeting of the Appeals Committee of the Irish Football Association, which we know as the IFA, which is modern day Northern Ireland. The IFA being the fourth oldest organisation in the world in the mid 1880s when it was actually founded. And the IFA had governed soccer for the whole of Ireland from it was actually 1880 it was established. And the IFA and Appeals Committee ruled the basis for this meeting was because of a match between Shelbourne, Steo, your club. Steo's a big Shells fan, and Glenavon, a Lurgan-based club, and it was in relation to playing a replay of the Irish Cup semi-final. And basically what happened was the IFA mentioned that they wanted to replay the match in Belfast because of the war conditions taking place in Dublin at the time during the Irish War of Independence. And Shells quite rightly said, no, like we have to have we have to apply, equality here. We want to be playing the match in our home ground in Dublin. And the IFA ruled, no, you're not playing, and they suspended the club. So the whole Leinster Irish Football Association decided enough is enough, and they completely broke away from the IFA. And that, in fact, was the start of the split between what was the IFA, the Football Association, which governed the whole of Ireland, and then what became the Football Association of the Irish Free State. Of course, the Free State just about began. The truce was called in the summer of 1921. And then in 1922, we officially became the Irish Free State. It was actually, 1923, we officially became the Football Association of the Irish Free State. So for me, this is hugely, a huge thing to take our place on the international stage. In 1923, we were officially recognised by FIFA. And then in the 1924 Summer Olympics, we made our international debut. Which is a huge moment. That the Irish team at the time wore blue, and the national team actually they honoured that a couple of years ago by playing in blue jerseys against Qatar. And on the 28th of May at the Stade Olympique in Paris, they beat Bulgaria 1-0 in our first ever soccer international in 1924. So we known as
the Republic of Ireland then?
We weren't. No, we were. It's an interesting. It's a good question, because even though we were recognised by FIFA in 1923 as the Football Association of the Irish Free State, we actually had to go into the Paris Summer Olympics under the term Ireland. I know it's a bit of a catch-22.
And the IFA were Northern Ireland.
The IFA were Northern Ireland, but they weren't officially Northern Ireland at the time. They kind of officially became Northern Ireland in a couple of decades later on. But Ireland did compete in the Paris Olympics. Even though we were the Football Association of the Irish Free State, we competed in the 1924 Paris Olympics as Ireland, which was really interesting. I think our national anthem was "Eire and Remember." Let Ireland remember. But like, imagine that, like the Irish team wearing in blue, Paddy Duncan scoring Ireland's first goal, and they actually qualified for the quarterfinals of the Olympic Games in Paris 1924, where they lost 3-1 to the Netherlands.
We were good. We were better back then.
yeah, exactly. And then we weren't finished though, because we actually the next day we played Estonia in a friendly game, and we bet them 3-0. So, and then we came back then, and we played our first home game against the United States in Dalymount Park, and we bet the United States 3-1. A guy called Ed Brooks scored a hat-trick. So
first Irish hat-trick, I'd assume.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed Brooks, 100%. Dalymount Park, yeah, exactly. And then
probably hasn't changed a bit since then.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think it's only now they're actually talking about redeveloping it.
Des Kelly, I think, still sponsored it.
the Jody Stand or whatever it's called. And yeah, we didn't play our next international then until the 21st of March 1926. It was an away game against Italy, which we lost 3-0. And what happened was, because we competed as an amateur team, the Olympic Games competition was downgraded, and as a result, those games they weren't regarded as official games. But that was actually reclassified in 1999 when FIFA and UEFA decided we're actually going to attribute those original games as official games, and as a result of that, those 1924 games in the Paris Olympics became the Republic of Ireland's first ever official games on the world stage. It's on record 100%. Hence why the national team was able to honor those blue jerseys a couple of years ago against Qatar. So huge moments in Irish sporting life and Irish sporting history. But on the topic of the 1924 Summer Olympics, it wasn't just soccer, football that we competed in. We competed in athletics, we competed in boxing, and we even competed in the likes of tennis as well. So there was still, I suppose you could classify it as, a Protestant unionist connotations with some of the sports that we were competing in. But look, it's just interesting that those sports we actually had participants in. And then what also we took place in the 1924 Summer Olympics at the time were art competitions. Right now, these aren't official sports competitions, obviously, but we actually got medals in two of the arts competitions. The first one we got a silver medal in, which was the literature competition. Sorry, the painting competition. It was William W.B. Yeats's brother, Jack Butler Yeats, his painting was the Liffey swim. And he won the silver medal. Like I'm trying to think back then. Like if you're actually I wonder, do you have to paint the painting there and then in front of the judges, or is it a case that you'll paint the painting and submit it? Like, could you imagine that the crowd, like, you know, Jack Butler hates on his canvas, go on, Jack, go on, yeah, go on,
Use the blue.
So like that's just crazy.
The
And
National Gallery. Oh, it's a nice painting.
yeah.
It's really cool, yeah.
And literature is another section that we won in, and it was the man himself. You mentioned him a couple of minutes ago, Kieran, Oliver St. John Gogarty.
Not just a pub.
Not just a pub.
An overpriced pub.
A very overpriced pub. $7.50 plus for a point nowadays. But he got a bronze medal in literature for Ireland. So there you go. We go on. The lads is right, and we did have other. I'm not going to say athletes competing in those categories, but we did have.
Just doing his hand stretches.
Yeah. Oh, stop. But no, look, it really interesting. We did. We had people competing in sculpturing, other painters, etc. So that was really interesting. And I think, before I wrap up, before I kind of hand the reins over to Steve. The other kind of interesting area would have been rugby, and rugby, of course, in Ireland at the time, probably associated with, you know, Protestantism, unionism, etc. But there was like, if you look at Blackrock College, the man himself, Eamon de Valera, actually played rugby.
He was an unashamed rugby fan. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, he actually preferred rugby to Gaelic games, anything else. He was unashamed fan of rugby when it was it wasn't the most popular thing for somebody, a Republican like him, to talk about.
Absolutely. So it wasn't just kind of Protestant unionism, and certainly if you look at in the modern day society, you know, it's very much split across Protestants and Catholics that play Irish Rugby Football Union. So what happened was, in 1927, a new crest was introduced, but the team did remain as a full, you know, 32 county team, very similar to hockey and the likes. And what they did decide that the flag of the IRFU would now display the crest with 3 shamrock sprigs at the centre, and then the crests of the 4 provinces on the 4 corners of the flag, and that's the flag that they still use to this day. You know, there was controversy about when the Irish tricolour would be flown, and the IRFU back in the 1920s were actually they were reluctant to have the tricolour on display at these matches, but from some kind of political pressure at the time, the Minister for External Affairs, I know we're kind of skipping forward a decade to 1932, but he basically insisted that the IRFU, you know, have to have the tricolour on display. So there was in the 5th of February 1932, the IRFU unanimously voted to fly both the national flag and the flag of the Irish Rugby Football Union at Lansdowne Road going forward. So there was some interesting changes at the time, and then of course to this day, you know, when Ireland compete in the World Cup, it's not the tricolour flag that's on display. It's the flag of the IRFU that's on display. And even though we sing 2 anthems at home, we sing Eire on Naveen, obviously at home when we're playing in the Aviva, along with Ireland's Call. It's only Ireland's Call that's sang at away games and in international tournaments such as the Rugby World Cup, which is of course it's going to take place in France next year. Ireland are number 1 team in the world at the moment, and they're going to be one of the favourites for the tournament. So they had a nice win last night against Australia. They bet New Zealand earlier in the summer for the first time in New Zealand, and they bet the world champion South Africa there a couple of weeks ago as well. So at least there's one facet of Irish sport that's looking up at the moment. The footballers who didn't qualify for the World Cup in Qatar. The Qatar World Cup is of course taking place today. Unfortunately, they won't be there, but let's hope they get to the Euros in 19.
That's alright. A bunch of pasty lads in Qatar doesn't sound
No,
right.
I think that's a fair show.
Big farmer stands on everybody.
Oh, 100%, man. But look, at the start, when we introduced the podcast series, we did say we were going to talk about it from the perspective of the 3 S's. So Kieran did a great job talking about social life in Ireland in the 1920s. I just wanted to give a quick summary in terms of what sporting life was like. We spoke about football. We spoke about the Irish competing in the 1924 Olympics. But we also want to leave you with a bit of a scandal. And I know that Steve's been doing a little bit of research about. I have to admit, a story I was unfamiliar with until you've spoken about it. So I think you're going to talk about the disappearance of Larry Griffin, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true. Kieran put me onto this, and it was interesting to learn about. If you want to learn the to get the gist, the fastest way to get the gist is on YouTube. RTE have a 3-part. Actually, on the Wikipedia page, down the bottom under references, RTE have a 3-part thing on YouTube, and you can see it there, and that gives you the synopsis, like a quick detail, like all of the kind of key points. The other thing I'd searched was, there's a YouTube channel called Dark Vaults. Now, the woman in it doesn't give her name. She's quite shy, but she's brilliant. She goes through everything in detail. But I think if you do want to get stuck into it, there is a 3-part RT documentary, and it's very good, and it gives a bit of a like a
historical reenactment sort of thing.
Yeah, reenactment. But it's like, so your man Larry Griffin, he served in the British Army, and he's from well, I have Wikipedia open here. He's from near Stradbally, which there's not a Stradbally in Laois. But the Stradbally, this kind of town, or where he disappeared, is in Waterford, and he basically became a postman, and back then it was basically customary on Christmas Day for people to give you like drinks. So like he'd be doing shots of whiskey
because he'd be delivering the post on Christmas Day, was considered a work day. Yeah,
exactly. And so I forget the name of the town, but anyway, his town that he was from was 8 miles away, and he basically picked up the post from there on Christmas Day, and then he started delivering at noon or something like that, and he basically had like a bottle of stout, or he had a glass of whiskey in each place, and so by the time like it got to 6, like he was well on, like he was like locked basically. Scuttered. Absolutely scuttered. But then what happened was, anyway, long story short, there was a pub called Whelan's in Stradbally, and he must have got talked into going there, and there was a number of eyewitnesses. So the key eyewitness was a teacher called Fitzgerald, I think his name was, and Fitzgerald gave a testimony. And he basically said what happened was the pubs in those days on Christmas Day, because of the intoxicating
liquor act, yeah.
So like
would have been maybe only a year or two old at that stage.
So
hence the pubs closing on Christmas Day up to this day. Yeah.
So the only people back then that were allowed in those pubs were teachers, lawyers, doctors, high society people, and if they were caught, they were in trouble. Now, what they used to do in those days is give the guards a bottle of whiskey to keep hush, but a thank you for all the
hard work. Yeah.
So they almost became speakeasies in a way.
Oh yeah.
So the eyewitness account was that Fitzgerald, the teacher, gave this testimony, and he basically went to the Garda station and submitted his testimony of what happened. And basically what happened, Larry Griffin dropped some money, 3 crowns or something, the old money. He dropped money, and apparently somebody took one of the crowns and got himself a point. And Larry Griffin goes, "What are you doing, taking me money?" kind of a thing. A scuffle broke out. He was pushed, landed on his head, and never woke up.
Oh wow.
So the barman,
is this in the pub Whelan's?
Yeah, Whelan. So the barman Whelan, or the owner of Whelan, said, "You'll ruin me if people catch me. I'm done for." And then I think somebody went, "Don't worry about it. We'll get rid of the body. There's nothing we can do now," kind of a thing.
Those are the two, the Garda that were rumoured to be in the yeah.
Now the names escape me now, but yeah. So what happened after that was, his bike was found, and it was a really wet night, and his bike was found and it was dry. So apparently they brought it out or something like that. But there was a load of testimonies. People didn't want to be found, or people who were involved in it didn't want to be known where they were, because I think there was an affair going on. One of the guards was having an affair with one of the girls, and obviously the publican didn't want, and the doctors and the teachers didn't want to be found.
Oh, it would have been a national scandal, really. Yeah.
So like they all got involved to effectively remove this guy's body.
Yeah.
Wow.
and there was 10 people on the dock. There was 10 people on the dock.
In the courtroom.
Yeah. And then the fella Fitzgerald, the teacher, he then removed his testimony, and the barrister was like questioning him, and he goes, actually no, I completely forget. I hadn't a clue what I was talking about. So I think one of the main guards was Ono Duffy that took over the case and really wanted to solve it.
He was the guard, the commissioner at the time, yeah.
Yeah.
Ono Duffy, future blue shirts leader.
Yeah.
He talking about them in an upcoming episode.
Oh god, yeah.
That's the 30s.
Yeah. Sorry, Steve.
He really wanted to uncover it, and I think, and I want to get your opinion as well. I think that's probably likely what happened. Now, some people are saying there's another kind of alibi there, but it doesn't really wash that. He just disappeared or something like that. But for me, that's what makes the most sense. And I think as well, perhaps, I'd like to get your opinion on it. Perhaps if he wasn't in the British Army, would they have been a bit kinder to the? Because as you said, Kieran, about his wife. He did have a wife. He did have kids. So they didn't even get a burial, you know.
No, they didn't get it. So here's one of the things, and when I was reading it, I found shocking, was because they didn't find the body. He wasn't declared dead. His wife couldn't get the pension. She had kids. The family were destitute. They didn't really get any help from the locals. They kind of knew what they had an idea of what had happened, but unfortunately, because his body wasn't found, the family were left destitute and poor, and that's the saddest thing for me, you know. And obviously not giving the man a burial, but for me, look, I don't think personally that it was to do with him being in the British Army. Well,
yeah, I'm just actually reading about it here. He was a bombardier of the artillery regiment in the British Army from 1899 to 1907, serving in British India, and he rejoined the army at the start of World War One. Was discharged on the 3rd of June 1916 due to injuries. His arm was permanently damaged, part of his ear was missing, and he lost several teeth. So the guy was hanging together, for want of a better phrase, you know.
Plus, he would need a drink with all those drinks.
several whiskies I think he needed to down. But
I'd say in reality, probably what did it is, and what the whole town coming together, that's what I find the most strange part of this. But in reality, I'd say, well, like I said, the Intoxicating Liquor Act would come in. Ireland was a deeply kind of conservative society, and to find the guards, the teachers, the civil servants all breaking the law, drinking on Christmas Day, this would have led to a national scandal, probably the fall of the Cumann Gael government at the time. Yeah. And I think there was probably something up on high, somebody who probably knew more than they knew, and you know, the body, God only knows where, but it was probably buried that same night, and the wall of silence then grew up around it. Apparently it is still, from what I've read, it's still pretty... Yeah, it's raw to people around there. They don't like to talk about it. There's families still, you know, relatives of these people still alive, you know.
There was three or four libel cases taken against the Waterford Examiner, and even up until your man Whelan died. I think your man Whelan died in the 70s or 80s. RTE wanted to bring out a documentary on it, and he threatened to sue, but turns out when he passed away, obviously because this one's live, and some of the ads I've seen, it's like something from the 2000s, so it's obviously well after. But just go back to what they had to do to try find the body. They had to exhume freshly buried people in the cemeteries around. They got a fella over from Liverpool to do a deep dive, but then he couldn't do it because it's too dangerous.
Why did they have to take bodies out of their graves?
Because one of the eyewitnesses saw somebody digging that night or the night after. And for somebody to be digging at 1 in the morning's weird. Wow. So they're like, okay, we better. That's probably a good option. Let's go look. So they have to dig up and look underneath. Pretty grim,
That's insane.
But yeah, so the libel actions came, and there was a number of letters sent to the. There was number of letters sent to the wife to say, look, we know where he is. She would have got a lot of them letters, and so she was put through the ringer. But as I said, all the details really. The best one is that lady from Dark Faults on YouTube. She does an hour and 7 minutes on it, and she goes deep. Every little detail is in it. I'll just give you a gloss over there, but yeah, for me anyway, it it's just a tragedy really. But for me, I'm just wondering if he had been like, I don't know, Republican or something like that, like would they have been so kind of cover up?
Well, so there were still divisions between what were the Free State and the anti-treaty IRA. I don't think personally that would have come into, especially he was never involved with the Black and Tans or any of the people to get the hate. So like a lot of people of his generation joined the British Army because it was the only way to get like food and money. It was 3 square meals a day, which was a lot more. I like, in my opinion, it was to avoid a scandal because you know, at this time, you know, Ireland there'd been some kind of scandals and the guards hadn't come off looking good, and something of this magnitude, a person being killed in a fight or whatever in a pub on Christmas Day, surrounded by the great and the good of the local town, the civil servants, the teachers, the doctors. I mean, this would have been huge, and had it came out, I'd say this would be one of the more famous stories rather than what is a slightly forgotten piece of Irish history.
Yeah, as I say, I knew nothing about it until you lads did a bit of research on it. But I think to Kieran's point, I think it's just the fact that this pub was illegally serving alcohol on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And then several members of high society that were in attendance. I think regardless of his political or his military background, I think the same scenario would have took place. They were just covering it up so they wouldn't get caught.
Yeah, they probably, like the shame of being like a teacher or a doctor being in the pub on Christmas Day was probably like so great. And then especially for your man, like the other thing was if like people knew that there was a man killed in the pub, there was talk anyway on the Dark Faults podcast that people would never want to go there. And so he probably felt ruined. Yeah. So that's they probably collectively made that rash decision to just do it. Or there's another thing about a car as well. There was a car, and like back obviously in those days in 1929, cars were few and far between. But there was eyewitnesses accounts of like a car being driven from the scene, and I think somebody out of the doctors or the teacher had one car, and they may have took his body like a few miles away or something. So. Yeah. Who knows where he's buried? Fascinating story. As I say, I'll be doing a bit more research on it now because I think that if there's any documentaries or anything like that out there, I'd be fascinated to take a look.
Yeah, it's one of these things. So the reason we did this podcast is the 1920s is kind of a bit of a blank page for most people. Everyone knows the War of Independence ending and the Civil War in a small part. Yeah. But beyond that, we've seen the social life, we've seen the sporting life, we've talked about the culture, and now you see the scandal. And as I said earlier, it was a conservative country. God, you know, people. God, yeah. I mean, the Catholic Church were, in all honesty, running the country. You know,
they ruled the country with an iron fist for many decades. Post the 1920s, you know, only up until recently they started to lose their grip on society. For the better, in my opinion. But we'll get into that on one of our future podcasts.
Oh yes.
So I think I'm not sure if there's any final comments to add before we wrap up. Episode 1 of our first series of the podcast, gents. Any closing comments or thoughts? Observations?
Just we hope you have enjoyed this podcast. I hope you've listened. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you'll join us again for another deep dive into Irish history.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with your family, because we're only getting started. We are rusty, but thanks very much.
Thanks for listening, folks, and tune in again soon. We'll have our second episode coming to you soon, which is going to be a focus on life in Ireland in the 1930s, again from the perspective of the 3 S's, as we said: social life, sporting life, and scandal.
And a bit of scandal.
I'm looking forward to chatting to you guys again soon.
Woo-wee. Woo!